Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Discussing Resilient podcast. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about picking the right contagions for your games. If you do like what we do on this channel, don't forget to leave a like and a subscribe. If you enjoy it a lot, you can consider becoming a playground. That gets you access to the members Discord and also get into some giveaways that are coming soon. But enough about that, let's get into it because that's what you're really here for. So, quite quickly, we'll do a recap of what is a contagion. So, baseline is a growing aura from every Death Guard unit in your army. So do bear in mind, allies like Nurglings or Knights won't get this effect, but anything that you do bring from the lowliest cultist to the mightiest Primarch will have this. It's an aura that grows over the course of the game. So turn 1, it's going to be 3 inches from every unit, then turn 2, 6 inches, and turn 3, 9 inches. There are ways to amplify this with certain enhancements that give plus range. You can bring an Icon Bearer who can once per game make his squad have a 12-inch aura, and Mortarion has one effect where he can extend the aura of all nearby units. And baseline, what this does for you is it gives enemy units within Contagion -1 toughness. And also it allows you to trigger some stratagems like Boil Blight, which is a fantastic stratagem. So, what is good about it? Well, it gives you important breakpoints. A breakpoint is when a stat changes to a certain number that causes a dice roll to change. So for example, you have a strength 9 melter gun, you're shooting a toughness 10 tank. Normally you need 5s to wound. If you were to get someone within Contagion, that brings their tank down to toughness 9 or your strength 9, now you're wounding on 4s. You have hit a breakpoint in that model's toughness to affect a dice roll. This is the same for like shooting toughness 4 Marines with bolters. Now they're down to toughness 3. Now you wound them in 3s instead of 4s. Now this is important because making the most out of this contagion makes us less reliant on average dice than most average armies. Dropping Marines to toughness 3 or guard to toughness 2 means we can force a lot more saves on them with your average strength weapons. Like strength 6 is now wounding Marines on 2s, strength 4 is wounding Sisters, Guard, Tau, Infantry on 2s. And the amount of times you'll actually find yourself wounding enemy infantry, especially the infantry, on 2s can make you much less reliant on average dice and much less prone to having bad turns of dice rolls if you set it up correctly. In doing so, this allows us to maximize our damage output by making sure we are using the toughness debuff to reduce the correct targets for the weapons that we have available. So, if you have entry cannons which are strength 10, and that can be swinging into tanks, managing to drop a tank from toughness 10 to toughness 9 suddenly makes them a lot more desirable. And when you actually start to understand it and the effects it actually has on dice rolls and luck and probability, you actually figure out quite quickly it's not as bad as people sometimes say, and actually it's literally our best rule of an army. And the reason it truly is the best rule in our entire army and why it's so important is because what we can do to augment that. So, spread the sickness. Spreading the sickness is a game-by-game choice we can make after we know our opponent before the game starts. And what it basically does is it augments our -1 toughness contagion with an additional effect. So you don't lose -1 toughness, you get it on top of that. So the base choices are -1 to save characteristic, which is really good, -1 to weapon skill and ballistic skill characteristic, which can be quite good, and then -1 OC and leadership characteristic, which is a bit more niche. Now today, we're going to focus on the first two because they're the ones you're going to pick 99% of games. It's not because the bottom one is useless, but it's just, it has a very niche scenario in which you want to take it, and we can touch on that in a later video. But for this video, when people are asking the golden question, we want to focus on the primary two that really the decision is all about. So, the question I get asked the absolute most, and the reason I want to make this video is, Aiden, I'm against X. What do I pick? What do I pick versus insert faction? And in general, there are two answers I can give you to this. I can give you a generic, no thinking, dead brain answer, which is usually, oh yeah, just take that. And then you don't think about it and you just go, cool, yeah, I'll take that. Or I give you the actual answer, which will always be, 99% of the time, it depends. There's no actual definitive best answer, really. And people want a definitive best answer because that's natural, it's what humans want. But the reality is often not what we want. It's actually much more difficult to answer than that. And I'm hoping in this video, rather than telling you, rather than just pulling up a spreadsheet and being like, yeah, pick that, I'm going to help you know and learn how to pick for yourself the things you should be thinking about, what matters, and why they affect our decisions. Because in doing that, you'll become a much better player. So, factors to consider for all of this. Personal playstyle matters. People have different playstyles, even in same armies. There are more aggressive players, Will. There are more defensive players, me. And somewhere in between, Dave. Which is really cool for the channel. But that playstyle can affect the sort of build you want to do. And that will also affect the contagion you might want to take. Someone who is more interested in trying to stay alive as long as possible, maybe they find that fun, maybe that's how they like to win, might be more inclined to take a defensive contagion than an offensive contagion. This, however, isn't a 1-to-1 ratio. I am a defensive player, yet I always take -1 save pretty much. Now that's not saying you should never take the other one, because we'll get into that, but 90% of the situations I take -1 save, even as a defensive player. There are other reasons because of this. One of them is looking at the damage profiles that you have in your army. If you have a lot of AP1 sort of profiles, then -1 save basically makes them all AP2, which is where AP starts to get kind of painful. Especially on stuff like flamers, which naturally have the ignore cover, because AP1 in the game at the moment is kind of AP0, because cover is so easy to get. So if you shoot at anything with AP1, you might as well not have AP. So taking something to potentially AP2, because it's technically -1 save, actually now you're starting to actually ignore that cover and have an effect afterwards. And especially combined with Boil Blight, where we can just remove cover from a unit, now you're starting to really apply good AP. AP on high base AP attacks, so if you are AP3 naturally going to AP4, that can be good, but it is a bit more niche, because a lot of things in the game have invulnerables, and a lot of things in the game, when you start to get to those AP levels, don't get a save anyway. However, there is still benefits to bringing it, because stuff like 3-up save tanks are quite common, putting a Lascan to AP4, and again, cover always exists. You have to think about stuff like Armor of Contempt and stuff like that. Starts to again make an impact on the game, rather than just being overkill. So there's never really a scenario I've ever come up with something I've been like, wow, I've really overkilled this on the AP. Even with AP5 melters, just removing the fact like a Land Raider can potentially take a 6-up save is actually quite important, because we've all had it. You've lined up the shot, you're like, yep, double 6s, you need to save that, mate, and they bang the double 6s, and you're just like, fuck. Whereas if we've got the extra AP, we can remove those odds of happening. Now this also depends on the defensive profiles our opponents have. If our opponents have really good defensives, like maybe they're all 2-up base save, trying to push damage through on that is going to be extremely hard if we don't take -1 save. On the flip side, if they all have 6-up saves, or maybe they're all invulnerables, demons, then the -1 save becomes a lot less useful in that regard, and maybe we start looking at more defensive measures to stay alive so we can outlast them. Also, certain things like feel no pains, or the amount of wounds they actually bring on top of it, how fast you think you're going to be able to kill them with and without contagion. It all depends and all adds to factors we need to consider when we're deciding what contagion to pick. Another one is mobility. Mobility is important because if an enemy is slow, we are going to be able to get them in contagion range, and not only that, they're going to find it hard to escape contagion range. However, if you're against something like Eldar, a lot of people think you should take -1 ballistic skill as Eldar because they're quite squishy anyway. But the problem is the army's so fast, even if you get them in range, there's a good chance they can just walk out of it to 9.1 inches and shoot you anyway. So, whereas if you were against like mirror match Death Guard, they wouldn't be able to escape that. So there's different kind of mobility impacts on it as well, because again, as well, if you're playing a -1 save, you need to be able to get it up there, whereas if you're playing -1 ballistic skill, it's more for defensive around you, so they need to come to you. So these factors can play in. also the opposing army's style, like their style of chosen warfare. If they're all melee, for example, that kind of makes some of the spreading problems that you can have with -1 save, and also the defensive ability of melee armies will always be in Contagion, be more attractive. But then we have to look at, have they brought any guns at all? What kind of guns? Because maybe they've only brought a couple guns, but they're the most threatening things on the table. We have to understand how our opponent fights. Do they want to be taking objectives or just killing us off it? There's all these things we need to really consider when picking our Contagion. So these are some of the biggest mistakes I have seen in comment sections on like Facebook and Reddit, stuff like that. Oh, they have invulns anyway. It's got a 4-up invuln. Why would you ever take -1 save? You're already going to get them to your invuln. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. This 4-up save does not equal you never take -1 save. I'll just say that right now. Oh, the weapon skill and ballistic skill 4. Therefore, you can, they're going to hit on 6s because you're going to get -1 Contagion, and then they're going to be, you can -1 to hit with like Cloud of Flies. Okay, that's cool and that is true, but what if the army has a load of rerolls? What if the army has ways to get +1 to hit and +1 ballistic skill? It's not as cut and dry as that. There are very different things. What if they've got flamers, and what if it's all torrent weapons? Who the hell cares then? They're all melee, so therefore you should always take -1 weapon skill because they've always got to be in it. Well, that's cool and all, and I really like Def Company hitting on 5s, but they've got full inbuilt rerolls and they have like 60 attacks. I don't think it's going to save me, bud. Oh, they only have 5-up saves. You don't need the extra AP. They've only got 5-up saves. That's all well and good until they start spiking 5-up saves where they shouldn't. Whereas before, if I'd just took the -1 save, they don't get a chance to spike at all. I'm just going to kill them straight up. And the last one is -1 OC and leadership is completely useless. And even though we're not covering it in this video, that doesn't mean it's useless. It just has a very specific niche for very specific matchups. You might even see it in teams, but most time it is outperformed. I won't lie to you guys. It is outperformed a lot by -1 weapon skill, ballistic skill, and -1 save. But there are very small amount of games where -1 OC can actually be very, very powerful, and battle shock in certain units, as we said in our previous video, can actually lead to like wiping out units that can't resurrect and stuff like that. So all these things you see on the screen now are load of rubbish. Throw it out. If you ever hear someone reply to you with this, then just bin it. It's a bad sorry guys, it's bad advice. I'll be honest with you, because it's way more nuanced than this, and the best players know this, and the best players will not just look at a situation and go, oh, it's X, therefore X. Because a lot of people think that there is just a defined best choice for every army in the game, and that's not the case. One Blood Angel army is different to another Blood Angel army. What you take in one might be different to another. The only thing that's like kind of set in stone is like demons. You will never take -1 save versus demons because it is literally all invulnerables. They don't have saves. That's the only one that's kind of set in stone. Par that, nothing is set in stone. So let's start with -1 save. Let's talk about the pros. Obviously, it's a damage amplifier. That at any base level, everyone can understand. -1 save, opponent take more damage. The end. Everyone knows that. One thing people don't think about though is control of Contagion. -1 save, you as the player have far more control over than -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill. However, on top of that, you're going to come with some requirements that we'll look at in a second. But you being able to position it where you need it to be and look in your opponent's turn and go, if I go there, I'm going to attack that, and then I can set up shooting to fire into those certain things and kill them. That is really good because you have full control of that situation, outside of maybe like reactive and stuff. But outside of that, you can set up plays, which is really nice. We're also one of the hardest hitting armies inside Contagion with this buff on, and people really underestimate just how hard Death Guard can hit. And then when you do hit them, like they lose like half their army, like really quickly. So obviously dealing damage is fantastic. Dead models can't hurt you either. People always say, oh yeah, but we want to survive, which is true. But a model that never shoots its gun because he's dead can never hurt you at the same time. Like the guy who misses 90% of the time still has a 10% chance to put a bullet in your head, whereas the dead guy doesn't. So you're not going to get hurt by models that are already dead. And also, I think this Contagion has a lot higher stratagem synergy the ability to put an additional AP on top of it with Ferric Blight or Sanguineous Flux, giving the sustained hits, which then are obviously going to get more value out of the additional save. Boil Blight even, because then you're removing cover and -1 save in the target. I think it just has a lot more synergy as a package with Arc Stratagems, whereas the other one, -1 physical ballistic skill, kind of only synergizes with stratagem wise anyway, Cloud Flies and like Smokescreen. It doesn't have too much synergy with the others, whereas these straight up just flat out do, and that's really, really nice. However, there are some requirements for -1 save. You actively need to be spreading this contagion. You need to be getting units that can move fast, get up there, put stuff in contagion range. This is why I run units like cultists and bloat drones, because they're expendable, they're fast. If I get a unit of cultists up there, I get off a good boil blight, I use the mortars to like kill, 5 death company, and then the cultists die, fine with that trade. I lost 50 points of cultists for like 160 death company or whatever it was with the character inside. That is a good trade, and I'm willing to do that. But if you're not taking expendable, fast-moving, contagion-spreading units, then you're not going to be getting value out of -1 save, because you're not getting up there, applying it to enemy units, and then being able to shoot those units. However, on the opponent side, -1 save is hard for them to prevent value being gained. If you're actively putting it out there to try and spread contagion, it can actually be quite hard, because your opponent now has to consider not only just like being charged by select Plague Marines, but like the bloat drone with spitters. The amount of times people will leave that thing, they think, oh, I'm behind a wall so it can't shoot me, and I'm not really scared of its charging profile. And I'm like, cool, I will just move and advance it up to the wall, tag you in contagion, boil blight, now 3 mortars are coming in at you. A lot of people really struggle to understand and respect contagion range on top of movement. For -1 save anyway, because you are in control of where your models move when it happens. I do think this also has a large impact for shooting profiles. A lot of our melee is already AP2, which is quite nice, but a lot of our shooting, especially like flamers, are AP0 or AP1, predator autocannons AP1, mortars are AP1. There's a lot of AP1 shooting, so -1 save really, really helps our shooting output. And when you start firing and bringing a lot more guns in your list because you've brought -1 save, you actually become quite a formidable close range shooting army, more so than relying on melee. I say at the moment, Death Guard is a shooting army that uses melee to mop up and to threaten fights first. But I do 90% of my damage whenever I play my games is from shooting phase, not the melee phase. But for some reason your opponents are terrified of your melee, even though it's kind of meh. It's okay, it's good, but it's not like god tier, like it's not like Blood Angels clapping you. But people will over respect your melee, and then like maybe they'll measure it out thinking that that's your actual damage. I've had people measure like, the 8-inch disembark from the Rhino, and they'll put themselves like at a good distance away, and I'll just drive up 12, disembark 3 and shoot them to death instead. It's quite funny. But another thing you do have to be careful for with -1 save contagion is reactive movement. As you're moving in to spread contagion, you will have to move in 9 unless you've got amplifiers, and in doing so, if the opponent does have reactive moves, they can use them to get out of contagion range. So you always have to be asking, do you have any reactive moves in your army, because it is important to understand where they are and if they do have access to them. But Aiden, what about invulns? I want to point this one out specifically because this is my most hated thing. 2 up save, 4 up invuln does not make -1 save a bad choice. The existence of a 4 up invuln does not invalidate -1 save, because the biggest weakness of a 4 up invulnerable is making it roll a shit ton of dice. You shoot a las cannon which will one-shot the custody. He's got a 50-50 chance of making it. You drown him in the same damage worth of, so let's say the las cannon rolls d6 and gets a 6 damage. He's got a 50-50 chance of making that. I'm going to shoot him instead with 6 1 damage anti-infantry shots. He's going to fail half the saves and die. That is literally as easy as it gets. Because if I manage to make my flamers AP2, they're all damage 1, and he's took 6 of them, he's now got to roll 6 dice, of which 3 of them will fail. He'll take 1 damage each and they'll die. Whereas the last cannon has a 50-50 chance to live. They're both doing 6 damage in the end, but one of them got through by having weight of dice, as opposed to the last cannon which didn't get through because he made a 4 up. Death by 1,000 cuts is a fantastic way to deal with the likes of Custodes or anything that has a great invulnerable save. And People just write off -1 save as soon as seen invulnerable because they're like, oh, but it'll be wasting like melee and stuff. Yes, it is a bit wasted in melee, but the thing is, units that have 2-up, 4-ups are usually trying to be durable, and they're durable because of the invuln, because that absorbs the high damage, low quantity shots, and the 2-up save is there to tank them and save them against the high quantity, low quality shots. And if you take -1 save, you can present them with their nightmare scenario, high quality, high quantity AP shots, and that is what a 2-up, 4-up does not want to see. So if you ever see a 2-up, 4-up army like Custodes, don't you dare tell me that -1 save is bad, because it rips them apart in record time. And I've done it, I've seen it, I've witnessed it, I've bullied 500 Custodes players at this point. They will die to your flamers, easily. But moving on to the other side of the spectrum. -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, at its core, is a durability boost. We all know this. It's going to make you harder to kill. Makes sense. This is really good because it has stacking effects with -1 to hit rolls. So having Nurglings nearby can make stuff effectively -2 to hit in combat, or Typhus. Then you can Cloud of Flies and smoke in the shooting phase. There's great ways. Now, I'm just going to clarify this very quickly. The reason this works is because a weapon skill and ballistic skill modifier and a hit roll modifier are not the same thing. To put it simply, a weapon skill and ballistic skill is the baseline value your dice needs to roll to succeed. Then, +1 to hit and wound are added on top of that. So, you can modify the baseline stat, and then the roll itself can then be modified by +1 or -1, capped. So this means, because they're two separate effects doing two separate things, they can effectively stack. So someone who hits on a 3 is now hitting on a 4 baseline, and then we -1 to the hit roll, which makes it a 5, and that does work. What's good about this Contagion? Obviously, melee armies cannot avoid it at all. If they want to be in melee, they have to be in Contagion range. This can be very frustrating for melee armies to deal with, especially if you've got likes of Nurglings around as well, because they can't shoot the Nurglings off, which means now they're going to be -2 to hit, and it can really blunt and neuter an advance and an opponent's aggression into you. What this also does, and one of the strengths that is kind of overlooked, is it makes your opponent vulnerable to bad dice. It makes the worse you roll, the harder your rolls are to succeed, the more likely you are to get a bad roll. This makes sense, but we don't actually appreciate the effect that can have. It can cause things like mental tilt, which is very real. People roll a dice, they expect a certain result, they spike bad, it goes wrong, and they can really get in their own head about it. And it really makes your opponent vulnerable to having turns where just nothing connects, and then you can capitalize on that, which is really nice. Also, this is way more passive and less fort intensive than -1 save. -1 saves, you have to be constantly thinking about positioning, where you are, getting into good spots to spread it for next turn. -1 weapon skill, ballistic skill, not so much. You kind of just exists around you, and if someone come near you, they're going to be worse at hitting and shooting. There are ways to try and position it so you can get extra things caught in it, but at the end of the day, it's not as fort intensive as -1 save is. The downside, I think, for this, and the biggest downside, your opponent has way more control. Your opponent decides, unless they're melee, of course, in which case they're kind of screwed, but opponents like, say you're against Tau, okay, they hit on 4's base, and then you can potentially get into 6's. But what happens if the Tau player just keeps measuring 9.01 away? It's in his control to put himself in those positions. And let's say you've put a bloat drone deep into the lines, so he can stay 9.01 away from the thing he wants to shoot, but not from the bloat drone. Again though, the sequencing of your opponent's shooting is in his control. He could use a hammerhead that stood away in the corner to pop your bloat drone, which will then remove the contagion, which then means his second unit, which he then activates, is no longer in contagion. And all of that control is in your opponent's hands. Now your opponent might be an idiot and might not do that, but the smart opponents obviously will, and they'll think about it, they'll stay out of contagion, they'll dance around it, or they'll, remove the things trying to spread it into the army before the things shoot that want to shoot deeper into your army. And that's one of the things I don't like. I like my rule, especially given it's the most powerful rule in the army, to be in my control. Obviously, terrain can impact effectiveness of this as well. If you have lots of narrow firing lanes and narrow angles your opponent has to get in, it can actually be quite available to, get people stuck in positions where they can't avoid contagion, which is great, and then they're going to suffer the penalties. But at the same time, you might be on really long open firing lanes, in which case your opponent never even has to come near you to shoot you. So that can be quite impactful on how effective this contagion is going to be. The amount of rerolls your opponent has as well can really limit the effectiveness. -2 to hit is fantastic, but if your opponent has full rerolls to hit, it's a bit less fantastic. Still good, but it's not the 3 when we thought it's going to be. So armies that have the capacity to reroll mass amounts of dice are going to be able to limit how good this contagion could be. Also, I feel like to get the most out of this contagion, you have to understand opponent's armies way more than -1 save. -1 save, you need to know how tough they are to kill and what damage you bring, which is your own army, which you should know. To get the most out of ballistic skill and weapon skill, you kind of need to know your opponent's synergies and buffs themselves. You might again go into Tau thinking, cool, I'll make him -2 to hit, sweet. Then you realise the Tau player can, because you didn't know this, because again you're not a Tau expert, no one is expecting you to be. The Tau player then gets guided and gets +1 ballistic skill. Then he uses stratagem to get +1 to hit. He's negated completely your entire combo and he's hitting, admittedly not on 2s anymore, but on 4s, which is like shooting you like normal. So you need to be aware of what your opponent can do, the synergies they can bring to the table, which is obviously a lot more mental taxing in that way, because you need to be aware of the metagame around your army. And the other thing is to understand both armies will be dying slower. So if you're in a game where your opponent has like way out OC'd you on stuff, and it's going to be all about the primary, making yourself die slower doesn't really help you because your opponent's dying slower. And in those kind of games where you're going to lose on primary, etc., you kind of need to be killing them faster than you're dying, and way faster, especially if you're outnumbered on like the certain units you've brought. They've brought a lot of OC, you haven't. So understanding both armies dying slower is sometimes good, but sometimes it's not what you need to win the game. Okay? So, which contagion, Aiden? Personal choice for myself is -1 save 90% of the time. The main reason for this is because it gives me control of our most powerful rule. I get to make plays with this rule. I get to put myself in positions and then set up shooting or charges to make the most out of this rule. It is in my control to get our most powerful rule and use it the best I can on the tabletop. Now, this being said, I won't always take it, because some units have absurd defensives, so like bully boys of feel no pain. I could try and damage check it, but maybe that's not always the right play. Sometimes if I just feel like I can't kill something because it's just absurd, maybe I'm just trying to hang on and stay alive at that point. So that's when I'm looking at -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill. But coming back to the -1 save, removing opponent's models is always good. Always. You're not just killing them, you're removing assets. That means less assets that can score primary, do secondaries, and kill you back. The best way to win Warhammer is to make your opponent take models off the board, because the less models they have, the more models you have, you can then snowball that effect into winning. They can't score secondaries, or they can, but now they're not shooting you because they don't have enough units to do it. So removing assets from an opponent is as fast as possible. Sometimes how fast can you remove their models is actually quite important, because if you're against an army that you actually can't really remove them that fast, then maybe -1 save isn't the play, and maybe that's when it's all about preserving and kind of trying to match their tempo. But if you go into it and go, okay, they've got 20 units to my 10, but if I get one good turn, I can remove a shit ton of them, then maybe you want to go for the -1 save and just focus on trying to get their assets down to your level, and then you can out-quality them on the assets that you have left. On the flip side, you need to think about who's going to be making the engagements. -1 save is great, it's fantastic, but the problem is, what if your opponent has the speed and the ability to always get the jump on you first? Then the same rule applies. Dead models deal no damage. That's yours as well, not just your opponent. So you know the opponent's always going to get the jump, and like terrain might be against you in this way. You haven't brought Plague Burst Crawlers, you're against Blood Angels, they've staged all in the middle. You now know that you're going to have to get charged because they're just way faster than you. They're always going to get a jump on you, and that means they're going to get to swing at you first. So now we kind of need to focus on trying to stay alive through the initial attack and then hit back, and that's where -1 weapon skill, ballistic skill might become important. But at the same time, what if the terrain allows you to stage or allows you to get cultists or guns up there to tag them in contagion range? Then maybe you can kill them before they ever hit your lines. Another thing I like to think about is when I look at my opponent's army, I like to do what's called the backbreaker. The backbreaker is having the go turn. It's the turn where I'm going to come in, I'm going to get your army and snap it over my knee. So, is that viable against every army though? No, some armies aren't vulnerable to a backbreaker turn. Certain ones are, definitely. Like, I feel like the Blood Angel matchup definitely is. If I get a good turn and kill like the 2 big Death Company blobs, then I'm in a really good position. But certain armies aren't, especially like MSU armies where it's a lot of like smaller assets that all add up to the bigger picture. It's kind of hard to backbreak that. So in that instance, maybe -1 save isn't as important because I don't need the output to make those backbreaker turn happen. If I know I can end a game in 1 turn, if I get a good setup, I'll take -1 save because it's going to make that turn, that backbreak, way easier to do. But at the end of the day, me saying this is the best, the guy on the internet saying this is the best, the guy over there saying that is the best. You want to know what the best one is? Experience. Try stuff, do stuff, play stuff. You know yourself better than me. You know your meta better than me. All I can do is tell you the things you need to think about. Then you need to go and think about them in the way that you have it, and then try it on the table. Does it work? Didn't it work? Half the time when stuff doesn't work, that's as important as learning from the stuff that does work. And hopefully, by knowing now the things you need to sort of look out for, you can take these to your game and look out for them. So think about it when you're playing the game. Think about, do I want to take charge here? Do I want to take the one that's making the plays? Maybe I'll take -1 save this time, when normally maybe you're a defensive player and you go -1 weapon skill, ballistic skill. So experience is going to teach you way more than anyone on the internet telling you to take X versus X army. But yeah, to summarise, there is no 100% answer. I wish I could just give you a spreadsheet that just says take this versus this. But I'd be lying, and I refuse to do that to you guys. I'd rather give you the tools you need to find out the answer for yourself. The best players weigh up all the factors. It's not just I am versus this army, I will take X. A lot of the time it kind of is at the baseline level, so like I'm 90% locked in on save, but I will always check that list, see what they've got, and if there's something in there that I'm like, maybe not, I will change if I have to. But one thing I will say is I will recommend you start playing, especially if you always play ballistic skill and weapon skill, start playing with -1 save, because -1 save is really good for learning how important contagion is and how important positioning is, because you have to take lead and charge over the power of the contagion. You have to put yourself in positions, you have to make things happen, and that's kind of not the same vibe you get with the -1 weapon skill, ballistic skill. You kind of just exist, and if they come in range they get debuffed, and like that's it. Whereas -1 save is going to teach you about aggression, teach you about trading, and I think it's really good for that. But always remember, guys, in the summary at the end of the day, if it works, it works. If you've got something good going for yourself and it's working and you're getting good results out of it, then that's the right play for you. So maybe I sit here and say against Marines you should always take -1 save, but you've played 10 games in your local meta against Marines and you've took -1 ballistic skill, weapon skill every time, and you've won all your games. Don't change for me, mate. If it's working for you, it's working for you. You keep it up. You keep smashing those loyalists back into the dirt. I'm proud of you, kid. But this is what I mean. Is no definitive answer. What works for one doesn't work for another, but at the same time, it's all about looking for the factors and understanding why it's working, what you're doing is working, and changing that. Even the same list can be different. You could play the same list you have locked in ballistic skill, weapon skill against every time, and then suddenly you come across the exact same list, but it's played by someone different, and they have a different way to play it. That could affect your choice. There's tons of different things you need to constantly be thinking about. But one thing I would like to say is my default is 90% going to be -1 save, because it suits me as a player. I like maximizing my output, minimizing the odds on my dice for them to spike saves and stuff. I like making my opponent taking those big turns of damage, the backbreaker turn. That's the reason I take -1 save. Not because it's just good versus them. It's because it fits how I play and how I want to have impact. And when I do connect, I want to make sure it hits as hard as possible. Even as a defensive player that I am, I'm all about the counter punch. Even in defensive players, there's different things. There's defensive players who really like trading. There's defensive players that want that one knockout punch back. There's defensive players that just want to attritionally survive and outlast and outscore. It's different for everyone. That's the one thing I want you to take away from this and start looking at in your games, in your matchups, and trying to figure out the best Contagion for yourself. So thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you did enjoy it. Remember, if you do enjoy the content on this channel, leave a like and a subscribe. We don't just give straight, easy answers that I believe can be quite commonplace. We try to give you the tools and the knowledge to know what you're looking for, to teach yourself to make the right decisions. I hope you enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, please check out any of the things on the screen right here. If you enjoy some or would like to get your hands on some Vanguard disgustingly resilient gaming aids, check out Saltire Games at the Etsy link below. Use promo code NERGLE to get 10% off your order and give a little bit of kickback to the channel, which is massively appreciated. If you want to learn how to play Warhammer or up your game to the next level, check out Vanguard Tactics in the affiliate links below. They have great masterclasses on certain factions that are coming out as codexes are coming out. They also have great learn to play Accelerator courses, etc. And of course, thank you to our members. If you want to become a member, please feel free to do so. You'll become a Plague Marine, access to the Discord. We have a new giveaway coming up soon as well, very, very soon actually. And you get to hang out in there. It's a really nice place. Everyone sort of chill. We talk about lists and stuff. The Plague Surgery is now open, which is kind of like a fix my list thing. What we're going to do the first stream of next week. And yeah, it's really cool. And it's nice to have the support of those lot as well. So thank you to you. And last but not least, thank you to you, the listener. Again, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy it. And until next time, everyone, stay rotten and I'll catch you then. See you later, guys.